The streets of Iran are not loud right now. They are silent, not because people stopped protesting, but because the internet was turned off. Behind that silence, hundreds are dead. More than 500, according to human rights groups. Thousands more arrested. Women, children. This is not chaos by accident. This is pressure reaching a breaking point. A collapsing currency, sanctions squeezing daily life, an authoritarian state that no longer tolerates anger, only obedience. And then, from across the world, a message appears from the President of the United States. Freedom. America stands ready to help. That single sentence changes everything. Because when protests meet superpower rhetoric, history accelerates. Mistakes become wars. Words become weapons. If you think this is only about Iran, you're already behind. Stay with me. Because before we talk about intervention, threats, or the future, you need to understand what this moment really is. What you are watching is not a sudden explosion. It is a slow burn finally catching fire. These protests are not about one law, not about one leader, not even about one decision. They are about survival. When a national currency collapses, daily life collapses with it. Food becomes uncertain, jobs disappear, savings evaporate. In Iran, that economic pressure sits on top of something heavier. An authoritarian system that controls speech, controls media, controls the definition of truth. So when people go to the streets, the state does not see citizens. It sees threats, foreign agents, rioters. That framing matters because once protesters are labeled enemies, force becomes justified. Arrests multiply. Deaths are dismissed. Now add a second layer. External pressure, sanctions, and a US president openly signaling support for protesters. This crisis is no longer internal. It is structural and potentially international. To understand why this moment feels so dangerous, we need to step back and look at how Iran arrived here in the first place. To understand this moment, you have to understand the cycle. Iran's economy has been under strain for years, but pressure does not break systems evenly. It accumulates quietly until it doesn't. Sanctions tighten the flow of money, especially oil revenue, the backbone of the economy. At the same time, the national currency collapsed to record lows. That is not an abstract problem. That is rent doubling, food prices rising, life shrinking. When shopkeepers in Tehran closed their stores and walked into the streets, it was a signal, not ideology, economics. History shows this pattern again and again. Economic stress weakens legitimacy. Authoritarian systems respond by tightening control, not by opening dialogue. So dissent becomes criminal, protest becomes subversion, and violence becomes policy. The internet blackout fits this logic perfectly. If people cannot communicate, outrage cannot synchronize. Or so the state hopes, but repression has a paradox. The harder it presses, the more visible the fracture becomes, and fractures invite moments of crisis. Which brings us to the first major escalation, the point where protests turned deadly. The first real rupture did not happen in a speech. It happened in the streets. Security forces moved in. Protests were no longer tolerated. They were crushed. According to human rights groups, the death toll climbed fast. Hundreds killed, thousands arrested, including women, including children. This is the moment everything changes. Because once blood is spilled at scale, there is no reset button. Fear spreads, anger hardens, moderation disappears. The government called the protesters rioters, even terrorists, backed by foreign powers. That language is not random. It is a signal to the system and a warning to the public. At the same time, Iran went dark, an internet blackout across the country, not to restore order, but to control the story. When a state shuts down communication, it admits something powerful. It is no longer managing dissent, it is containing it. If you're still seeing this as a protest story, pause. This is a legitimacy crisis. And once legitimacy collapses, power relies on something else entirely. In the next part, we need to uncover the mechanism behind that power and why it reacts this way every time. Power in Iran does not operate on persuasion. It operates on control. That control rests on a simple mechanism. Define the state as sacred. Define dissent as betrayal. Once that line is drawn, everything follows. Protesters are no longer citizens with grievances. They become tools of foreign enemies. Mercenaries. That word matters because when dissent is framed as invasion, repression becomes defense. Violence becomes patriotism. Silence becomes loyalty. This is why the response is always the same. Crackdowns, arrests, information blackouts, not because the system is strong, but because it is rigid. Rigid systems cannot bend, they can only tighten. And when pressure comes from outside sanctions, rhetoric, threats, the instinct is not reform. It is fortification. That is the hidden mechanism at work here. Internal unrest is not treated as a problem to solve. It is treated as a war to survive, which leads us directly to the next escalation. Because this crisis no longer lives only inside Iran. It is now colliding with global power, and that collision is dangerous. The second escalation did not start in Tehran. It started in Washington. A US president publicly signaled support for the protesters, hinted at intervention, spoke the language of freedom. That matters. Because words from a superpower do not land as words. They land as pressure, as threat, as precedent. Iran's response was immediate and explicit. Any intervention, they warned, would trigger retaliation. American bases, ships, allies in the region, legitimate targets. This is the moment the crisis changes scale. What began as economic anger became political rebellion. What became rebellion is now framed as foreign-backed subversion. And now it is drifting toward a regional confrontation. There is no neutral ground here. Every statement hardens positions. Every threat narrows options. History is clear on this point. When domestic unrest intersects with external rivalry, outcomes spiral fast. Not because anyone wants war, but because systems misread each other under stress. And while leaders trade warnings, something else is happening quietly. Ordinary people are absorbing the cost. That is where we need to go next. While leaders trade threats, you are not thinking about geopolitics. You are thinking about safety, about food, about whether tomorrow will be calmer or worse. If you are an ordinary Iranian, this crisis is not abstract. It is personal. The internet is gone. Information disappears. Rumors replace facts. You hear about arrests. You hear about deaths, but you cannot verify anything. Every knock sounds heavier. Every night feels longer. And when the state labels protesters as terrorists, it blurs a dangerous line between dissent and crime, between citizens and enemies. This is how fear spreads. Not through speeches, but through uncertainty. You are trapped between forces you cannot control. An authoritarian system tightening its grip, and foreign powers signaling interest but no guarantees. If you feel powerless watching this from afar, imagine living inside it. This is the human cost of structural failure. If this analysis helps you see beyond headlines, share it, because understanding is the first step before judgment. In the next part, we widen the lens to what this crisis means for the world. What happens inside Iran does not stay inside Iran, because Iran sits at the center of multiple fault lines: energy, security, ideology. When instability rises here, markets react. Oil prices feel the tension. Investors recalibrate risk. But the deeper impact is strategic. The Middle East is already crowded with unresolved conflicts. Any direct confrontation involving Iran pulls others in: the United States, Israel, regional allies, proxy forces. That is why Tehran's warnings matter. They are not rhetoric for domestic audiences alone. They are signals to the entire system. Add another layer. Just months earlier, US strikes hit Iran's nuclear facilities. That history is not forgotten. It shapes every interpretation, every threat. So when Washington talks about help, Tehran hears regime change, not humanitarian concern. This is how miscalculation begins. Each side believes it is deterring the other. Both may be escalating instead. Global order is fragile in moments like this, not because of one decision, but because of many small ones stacking quickly. And when systems stack pressure without release, they eventually break. Which leaves one final question. Where does this go next? From here, the future does not move in one direction. It fractures into paths. The first scenario is restraint. The protests continue. The state represses but avoids mass escalation. Foreign powers hold back. Tension simmers but does not explode. Iran absorbs the shock, barely. This is the least dramatic outcome, and often the most deceptive, because unresolved pressure does not disappear. It waits. The second scenario is miscalculation, a strike, a provocation, a moment where deterrence fails, an attack on US assets, or a deeper intervention signal from Washington. Suddenly, protests become a pretext for conflict, and civilians pay the price. The third scenario is systemic rupture. Legitimacy erodes faster than force can contain it. Cracks appear inside the system itself, not collapse, but instability that cannot be fully controlled. History tells us this much. Rigid systems survive until they don't, and when they change suddenly. The future of Iran will not be decided by slogans. It will be decided by how power responds to pressure, and how long society can endure silence. Which brings us to the final question. What should you take away from all this? This moment in Iran is not just a headline. It is a mirror, a reminder of what happens when economic collapse meets political rigidity, when dissent is criminalized, when communication is shut down instead of conversations opened. It is also a warning, because external intervention, even when framed as support, carries consequences. Words from powerful countries travel fast, and they can ignite systems already under strain. If there is one insight to hold on to, it is this. Stability is not maintained by force alone. It is maintained by legitimacy. When legitimacy erodes, control becomes louder, more violent, more desperate. What happens next in Iran will shape more than one country. It will test how the world responds to internal unrest in a nuclear-era state, and whether restraint still exists in global politics. If you want to keep understanding how these pressures connect power, people, and the systems between them, stay here, share this analysis, and watch what comes next. Because history is moving quietly, and then all at once